All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. It's 9:20, and I've got the floor until 10 o'clock. Awesome. So let's get started. Just a couple of quick announcements before I get started. Microphones for questions afterwards are in the front second row, and I believe there may be one in the back. It may have migrated somewhere, but as soon as there it is, right back there in the corner. So if you have any questions afterwards, feel free to migrate your way over to the microphone. That's so everyone can hear it as well as I can hear it without much issue because my ears are horrible. So for today, I'm going to be talking about SMACSS, which is Drupal 8 CSS organization to make your life a lot easier when theming. So just a quick note before I get started, SMACSS or CSS organization standards are currently not a requirement or a standard for Drupal 8. They're more like recommendations, best practices with the best intents and purposes of making it a standard down the line as Drupal 8 continues to iterate and release more large-scale releases. If you want to follow along, there's this Drupal.org link right here. You can follow along with the current setup for it, the conversation about what direction it's going in, where it's going to be placed in the roadmap, and all that good stuff. If you really want to get into the technical details, that'd be a great place to start. So my name's Eric Simbrat. I currently work at Georgia Tech in the College of Engineering as a web manager. As I mentioned earlier, I help lead the Atlanta Drupal users group, and I'm also a doctoral student at Georgia State University. Good Lord. If you want to learn more about me, visit my website, webit.com. You can find out social media information, how to contact me for any questions. Find my Twitter account if you want to discuss any of this afterwards in more detail. I'm more than happy to. So let's get started. So CSS organization always tends to be the hardest part about working with themes, at least for me. I find myself being drowned consistently in finding content and finding changes that I need to make. It wears very quickly at my sanity. I feel like that basically. So CSS best practices really didn't exist a whole lot in Drupal 7 beyond here's the way you should write your CSS to make it easier for people to edit it. When it comes to actual organization and hierarchy and how you actually build out your files, there's not a whole lot over there. And if you want to look, there is a historical document that they still have on what the standards were. And they're pretty basic if you've ever touched CSS. So, of course, a lot of your theme frameworks for Drupal 7 ended up going in their own path, which resulted in a lot of confusion and headache for you, the Drupal user. So, of course, I bring up Zen. You may not be using Zen, but you've probably heard of it. When you go to Drupal.org, I'm just going to show this as sort of like a it never ends kind of thing. Let me go to Drupal, click download and extend, and then let's look at themes. What pops up on number 1? Zen. So it's always going to pop up, and heaven forbid if you're a new user to Drupal, that's the first thing you're going to see when you're looking at extensions. With Zen 3, here are all the CSS files that you get out of core. That's a lot. And finding out where files actually exist, why they're in a particular place, where they're getting imported, can be a bit of a frustration. Now with Zen 5X, they simplified it a bit more. They pretty much threw everything into one file, which they then have 3 different formats for. Yay, lucky us. Doesn't really, so those aren't really going in the direction of making it easier for y'all's life. And that's really how I feel. I mean, trying to find where the relevant styles and where the organization for the CSS is a real painful hypnotic way to live. It's not very fun. But there's an easier way. And we're starting to see some best practices come about both within the Drupal community as well as in general web development that is making our life a whole lot easier. And that's where I get into SMACSS really. So SMACSS is, of course, your style guide. It's not really a very rigid framework. It's more giving you a organizational structure, file hierarchy, and a sort of vision, almost like a roadmap for how you build out your theme and how you build out all your CSS files. The way you're thinking about this is sort of fitting a flexible thought so that you can hopefully and very carefully and quickly organize all your specific rules and selectors and all your different classes into a way where you can easily find them. And of course, SMACSS stands for your scalable and modular architecture for CSS. So that's where they get it from. And of course, so SMACSS, if you go to their website, if you want to learn more about it, you got to buy the book, either ebook or printed version. You can find out more about SMACSS. You can learn all the nuances of it. For this presentation, we'll be doing a very 30,000 level overview. But if you really wanted to get into the details of how to do it, it's a good place to start. So SMACSS really follows along with a lot of what object-oriented programming does, which is that you're wanting to basically increase the value of actually your selectors and make sure that they have value there, and also decrease the expectation of following a very rigid structure and framework so that it's flexible enough to adapt to your needs on your website. So you're not having to essentially build CSS selectors that have a boatload of commas, and you're basically drilling down through a lot. Pretty much just like with object-oriented programming, you're looking for patterns in your CSS and then writing your structure of your CSS files in organization so that it can take advantage of all those patterns that already exist. And that makes it reusable for you. It makes it so it's a lot less changes you have to make whenever you have to go in there and change a color, change a specific organization, change the look and feel of a header in a particular area, change how your sidebars look. And it also makes it a lot easier for you to adjust to changes and separate stuff out as you're building and extending and expanding what your theme would do. So again, SMACSS is intended primarily to be a starting point. It's not rigidly defined, and there aren't specific requirements that you have to have. You can expand it, extend it, sort of deviate from it a little bit if your workflow, if your project, if your organization does things in a slightly different way. You can essentially take what's given and take the organizational principles there and adjust them for what you need. And at Georgia Tech, that's actually what we're doing. We took a lot of the structure there and then shifted it slightly for our user audience and tried to make it a little bit easier for people to pick up. So SMACSS at the end of the day is organized into 5 different areas. You have your base, layout, module, state, and then your theme. Going into each of these, so your base rules are pretty much your very, very default, very basic selectors, child selectors, and your pseudo classes for the very basic HTML selectors within your project. Very similar to how reset.css is, you're wanting to just define very, very basic organizational sizing, layout constraints there, and just build it out very simple so that you have a very good foundation to work with. So you start with that. Then you move into your layout. Layouts are going to be basically about the organization of how your actual content is set up. So sizes, locations of your template areas like headers, footers, sidebars, main areas, breadcrumbs if you run them, all that good stuff. Your module is actually what's within those actual layout areas. So you've got navigation bars within your menu, widgets within your sidebar. That's where you're going to be placing your CSS for those specific areas. So you're defining how the look and feel of it is previously, and then within module, you're beginning to sort of build out what they look like. And of course, the good thing about modules is you're building them so that they can exist on their own. So rather than having to build one for each area, you're building it to be flexible enough so if you move your navigation to a particular area, it's scalable enough to sort of apply itself there as well. So of course with modules, you're looking basically at the classes there and trying to make it as simple as possible. And of course with state, you're going to be looking at some additional customization for a specific area. A good example for this would be, let's say a module would be a button. You have a very basic button. This is where you build out your buttons to be pretty basic and consistent across your website. In your state, you'd be able to build extenders on that for a specific type of button, like a cancel button, like an OK button, like a please don't touch this, you're going to break everything button, and make sure that the CSS that's applied there makes it very, very clear what it does. So for the please don't touch this, you're going to break everything, it's going to be dark red, it's going to have white text, it's going to be screaming at you, please don't touch me. Whereas for the green one, it's going to be inviting, it's going to be green, it's going to be please click me because I'm doing something good for you. And these are, of course, applying what you've done previously and just extending it a little bit more for what you need. And then, of course, finally, you have your theme. So this is taking all the 4 things that you've already done and then applying different CSS for your specific application or project. So these are like maybe your default link colors, maybe how your menu actually looks. Less than looking at how the CSS would be organized for building your menu. So taking the unordered list or ordered list and making it look, making it more like a menu, this would be where you'd apply the colors, the rollovers, all that good stuff. And so this is how SMACSS has it organized, but you can think about it in a little different way. So rather than thinking about it sort of drilling down from the top, from base all the way down, you can think about it more like this, where you've got on the left, base, layout, module, and state, and then your theme layer, the last one, is actually encompassing all 4 of those. So it's taking all the ones that it inherits from there and then making customizations based on what you need there for your specific project. And of course, within Drupal, Drupal likes to refer to module as actual component. And that's probably because module is already used for something and you don't want to have something that means 2 different things. So we've got component here, and that basically is meaning the same thing. So with Drupal 8, what's going on with Drupal 8 and SMACSS? So with Drupal 8, the recommendation here is to follow a very consistent theme structure for your CSS. So within your CSS folder for a theme, you've got a base folder, which inherits your base styling. And then, of course, you have your layout, which has your layout style. And you have your component folder, which has the styles there, and then your theme folder. Now, from the last slide, you'll notice that there are only 4 of these. But yet, if we go back, there were 5 here. And I'll go over that in a second. I think it's in a future slide, if not the next one. So the recommendation there is just to separate out your base layout components into their own individual files, with the caveat that, of course, Drupal is going to do all the hard work for that once you use that theme in your project. So you don't need to worry about sort of compiling it all into a single file. And of course, so what's going to happen here is that your state rules are actually going to be coupled with the component that you're working with. Sort of like media queries, you don't want your media queries to be in a separate file, because then when you're looking for how it looks by default and what each breakpoint is, you don't want to have to go to 2 different files to find out where all that is. That's going to give you a lot of headache if you're saying, well, here's the basic one, and then I need to find out what the viewport is for mobile, and then have to go find that mobile file where it would be. By combining both of these together, it'll make it a lot easier for you to build out what you need, and so that you can easily find where all these live. And of course, for components, you'll want to place those in each of your files so that you don't have one giant component file, one component.css that has all your different components site-wide. If you split them up into different files, you'll know where to go for each of them, and it makes it a lot easier when you're searching to make changes or when you're eyeballing it to find out what areas you have to change for your project. And so for Drupal 8 modules, they're applying something similar there. And for this, it'll be a little bit quicker overview. So they're just wanting you to split it up into a couple of different areas. Specific module styles, your very, very, very basic minimal theming there to get the modules functionality working. You don't really want to write a boatload of CSS for a module if a themer is going to come in and change it as soon as they enable it. So you want to give the very basic ones so that when someone enables it, they have a very, very simple overview that also accomplishes what the heck the actual module does. And of course, you know, the theme would be additional CSS that would make it pretty. So let's say we're building out the module CSS to make sure that, you know, your divs or your spans or your, you know, file organization for that module actually looks the way you intend it, and then your theme's going to make it a little prettier if you want to apply some styling beyond your basic CSS or basic HTML that's already in there, so that, you know, heaven forbid you're using tables or something like that, it doesn't inherit all that nasty structure. And of course, admin is just going to be your backend, so you want to build some minimal styles to get those administrative screens working if you're doing any customizations there. And then if you want to add some additional prettiness within your admin part, you build out that in a separate file. Beyond that, that's pretty much what you do for a module. Pretty much for a module, you're letting the themers and the actual theme that you're working with dictate how that looks at the end of the day. And of course, you know, a big note here that they really stress here is that modules should not really have any base styles ever. Your Drupal's doing that already. Your theme's doing it. Drupal core's doing it. You don't want to add another layer of complexity by having a module that overrides that again. So please don't do it. So help with SMACSS. If you're thinking about how, that was weird. If you're thinking about how to get started with SMACSS, it may be a little overwhelming to think about building out all these separate files that you can, or building out a theme that requires you to import a bunch of different files for each project. info.yaml file has all these different imports and making sure that all your CSS files are being touched. So that's where CSS preprocessors come into play. That's going to aid you a little bit, both on building out the SMACSS structure as well as making it scalable enough for you to work with for your specific use cases. So I always like to broadcast Sass and talk about how it helps to encourage consistency. Sass is, of course, a CSS processor. We saw a little bit of it in the last session. But what it does is it helps to sort of encourage that further usage of simplicity and consistency and reusability through a couple of things. So who's heard of Sass in the room? Almost everyone. Who's using Sass? Nice. Very, very proud of all of you. For those who haven't used Sass or dived into it very deeply, mixins are probably the most important thing you'll ever use Sass for. Mixins allow you pretty much to take a chunk of CSS, put it into a reusable function, a particular chunk of data, and then apply some different arguments. So you can set up some default values and allow it to be overridden where you have expected values and then sort of deviations for things. So for example, we could build a mixin for a button, and the mixin for the button would define the default state. So when we built out our SMACSS, our initial button would just be that mixin with no arguments whatsoever. But then when we built out the specific state for the, oh my God, don't touch this button, that's going to be a mixin that has arguments that changes the background color, that makes the text really big and really scary. It makes it very clear that you don't want to touch that. And so that allows you to basically reuse all that structure, basically have it all in there and have a central place to where when you need to make a change to that button, you do it in one place and it applies all at once. And of course, variables, those are pretty simple. Pretty much if you ever want to change the color of a theme, a background color, this also allows you to build out different font families, different font sizes that you'll be using. You can pretty much define a boatload of variables up front so that you can reuse those across your project to make sure that you're consistent and to track those changes, because those changes are going to come down. Someone's going to want to change a background color or a text color or a link color. And if you can do that in one place and have it apply site-wide, it's going to save you a lot of headache. And of course, this also brings in loops and logic, and I would also slash that and put magic. So in a case where you're having to sort of programmatically build out a bunch of different stuff, if you have to write CSS that applies for taxonomy IDs up to the first 1,000, you don't want to have to write all of those by yourself. Sass will allow you to almost write in these specific loops or iterations to be able to run logic on that. So a good example of this would be buttons. If you have a button and you want the background color of the button to influence what color the text is, you don't want to always have to define that text color. If Sass can see if that's a dark background color, use white text. If it's a light background color, use black text, and be able to do that for pretty much any theme variation you have. Sass can run that magic if you define it correctly. If you say if background color is less than 50% of dark of the black 000, then set your text color to this. Otherwise, set it to a more pleasing color and do that. And that will allow you to pretty much build out those mixins and build out your organization so you're not having to throw in a bunch of arguments on your mixins if you can have the system do it for you. And that's why I call it magic. It saves you a lot of headache if you can build that ahead of time and then reuse it to where you're not having to worry about this kind of stuff. Next is libraries. So the good thing about Sass is that we have a great community of Sass developers that extend Sass and provide you a bunch of pre-built libraries of things like CSS3, vendor-specific prefixes, or helpers to help you incorporate sprites into your theme, whether it's through text or actually giving you some helpers to make that easier. Rather than having to code all that from scratch, you can incorporate that. A good example of that would be Compass, although Compass is very much end of life. So something comparable to that would be like Bourbon. That's a mixin that handles a lot of vendor prefixes and a lot of helper modules that allows you to do a lot of work without having to sort of rebuild a lot of that for each project. And of course, the last thing is partial files. This is one of the things that I think for SMACSS especially will make your life super, super simple. And it's something that not a lot of people take advantage of. And partial files is the idea of within each of those folders. So let's just go back to that folder hierarchy for the theme there. Where did you go? There you are. So within each of these folders, you could have multiple files for your base, your layout, your component, your theme. And what you don't want to do is have all those being referenced within your file. If you just want one base file at the end of the day, but have it organized so you have like 25 files in there that are all being siphoned into that base file, that's what partials come into play for. So pretty much you build out different partial files in there within that base folder, and then when you define, for example, you know, your base layouts for text for all your headers. Within the base folder, you have a partial file called headers, and for each of those, you define your H1, H2, H3, H4, H5, H6, and define all that, and then you know it compiles into your base.css. And so when you're looking for files and looking for where all that comes from, you can find out exactly where it is and make that change super quick. Where did I go? I'm right here. Awesome. So the idea behind this is that in today's world, on the left-hand side, you've got your Sass file. So that's where you begin. You start right here. And then you go up to the very top and you start using and leveraging some of the tools that exist for you to compile that Sass into usable CSS. So you start with libsass, which would be pretty much Sass without Ruby. So you're looking at a C compiler. That's one, going to make your Sass a lot quicker, and two, allow you to do a lot more stuff with it. Allow you to build it within your tool set for Bower, like what we were seeing earlier. Libsass allows you to include that within your workflow. So all those files they run to pretty much compile their Sass and auto check for changes, that's where that lives. Sass globbing is something I'll go over in a second. And then, of course, there's those libraries like Compass, like Bourbon, that allow you to pretty much reuse components that have already been built out in logic that's already in place for the kinds of things that everyone in the world is dealing with. And then, of course, additional plugins as you need. And once you take all that, compile that down the list, then you get your CSS files. And of course, at the very, very top, that's where you start with a boatload of Sass files, and where you end up with is compiled CSS. That's the end of the day for you. That's all the SMACSS organization, taking all those partials and putting it into individual files and making your life a lot easier. So the question that I have is, what the heck is Sass globbing? What does Sass globbing is a bit of a seldom used, at least in the Sass community, module that does very well. If we take a look at this organization of your file structure, so at the very, very top left, let's say we have our pretty much default CSS file, and then with each of our folders, we've got a bunch of partial. What Sass globbing allows you to do is to define in that very first file up top how to go through each of these folders, check through all the different files, and compile them all down without you having to define each partial file. So you pretty much say with Sass globbing in the first file, say, go into this folder, check every single subfolder that exists, grab all the files there in alphabetical order, and combine them in. And what it's going to do is go into base, grab everything in there, compile it all down, spit one file out. It's going to go into layout, grab all the files in there, spit out one file. It's going to go into component, grab everything within that initial, let's see, so it'll go, can't remember if it goes initial directory first and then subfolder second, or whether that's flipped. But it's going to go both into the component folder as well as any folder you create underneath it. So it allows you to build out some hierarchy to give you a little bit more organization if your theme does go a bit wild. And the same with the theme part. So what I can do is do a quick example of how I'm using it at Georgia Tech for a Drupal 7 theme, so keep that in mind, as well as how we sort of extended it to make it a lot simpler for use. As a quick caveat, we have maybe 1 or 2 Drupal developers on campus that know Sass. We did have 3, but Eric Huffman left us about 1.5 years ago, and we went down from 3 to 2, so we lost a big player there. So for these web developers that may not have a lot of knowledge or a lot of experience with hardcore Sass and CSS organization, they need as much help as possible to get themselves off the ground of figuring out where the benefits are and where you can take advantage of this without having to reinvent the wheel and have to do all this work that someone else has already done. So we have Drupal. Let's go to a theme that I'm working on. A good example would be, you know what, let's just go with my aerospace engineering. So I need to make this bigger because I doubt a lot of you can see this. Show view options. Let's make this bigger. Can everyone in the back see that text or see it better? Okay, that is a nod, yes, and a yes. Awesome, cool. So within the Sass folder, I've got a couple of things going on. So as you can tell, this doesn't look a bit like SMACSS, but I'm taking SMACSS and then shifting it sideways to make it as simple as possible for someone that's never organization. And these are the type of people that maybe don't have a lot of experience with breakpoints or mobile queries or working with variables. So I'm trying to make this as simple and as down to earth as possible. So within this, what Sass globbing is doing is within this very simple file, I'm pretty much saying, you know, grab everything within these folders, which is pretty much just grabbing everything within these partial files right here, and then compiling them down into one simple file every time a change is made. So within the GT folder, we've got 3 simple files that are just partial files, and you can tell that they're partials because they have an underscore in front of them. So they're not being compiled remotely unless they're referenced. So in this case, colors is never being used because all colors is, if we open it up, it's just a bunch of variables. I'm defining how, you know, that looks awful too. Let's see if we make that a little bit bigger. Oh, that looks good. Let's go text display, show fonts. Oh, that's beautiful. So these are just using from very default variables, which is pretty much variable name, what it looks like to CSS. And I'm doing that for a bunch of things so that when someone wants to figure out what Buzz goal is, they don't have to remember EDB 221. I don't want to remember that. I don't know why I do, but I don't want to. But I don't want to remember that for dark blue, medium blue, old gold. Same with my fonts. I don't want to have to remember, oh man, it's going to make me change it all for each of them. I was hoping it would do it once and that was done. That's okay. Oh my gosh. So for each of my fonts, I don't want to have to remember the hierarchy of how it scales down if they don't have that font or if their computer is 20 years old. All I want to do is have it once so I can reuse it. So those partials are just being referenced first so that they can be used throughout anything else. And then I'm building out my mixins second. So your mixins, of course, are coming before anything because if you reference them, you want them to be defined beforehand. You can't use a mixin if it's defined at the very end of your project. So here's where all my mixins are to create buttons, to add icons for profiles, and then variables for example, all the font awesome variables that I'll need to use variables. And then with impartials, it's almost like what I'm using SMACSS here, but thinking less about the hierarchy from top to bottom and more about the kinds of pages that you'll be working on. So as in SMACSS is not rigid at all, what I've done is taken SMACSS and essentially hammered it down to what kinds of pages and what kinds of CSS changes are you making to a Drupal theme, and then separating that out. So if I want to look at an admin page, let's say I'm looking at an admin view or something like that, I can look in that folder. If I'm looking at some theme changes, like making some major changes to the header or how those things are going, I can look in there. Or if I'm looking at a specific page, I can look in this folder and find it. So what this globbing is doing right here, we have the, I believe it's the GT theme. Oh, it most certainly is. So within GT theme, if we take a look at what's going on in that file, oh man, that's gonna drive me insane. All it's doing is going into that partial folder and grabbing everything. And this is something that's generated by Sass globbing. So every time I compile, what libsass and Sass globbing is doing is going into this partial folder, grabbing every single file it can find, and then adding it in so that it's constantly being imported. So let's say I wanted to create a file here for Eric's profile. If I was running Sass right now, what it would do is as soon as that file was made, it would automatically add that to this list right here and include it in the hierarchy where it would go. In this case, because it's alphabetical, what it's going to do is it's going to add it right above the header.scss. So it's going to go right in between these two. So that way, as I'm continuing to build my project, I don't have to worry about making sure that all these different files are included as I start to build out different components. So as I start to build out specific pages, all I need to do here is add a page and build it. And this is the value of what you can use a CSS processor and Sass globbing with. And of course, using your SMACSS organization is you have that very flexible structure that you can then flex for what your project needs based on what your development community has and based on what your end users expect. a little framework for it that works for you, and the expectations of SMACSS, but extend it for what you need, and then build it out so that it's as flexible as possible as your project changes, or for the different kinds of projects you'll be doing. Now, for each of these pages, I could have a project that is 3 pages that I'm doing Sass for. I don't know that I have one offhand that has a ton that I can think of. You know what? That one would probably be ugly. Let's take a look. No, it's not that bad. It's a couple of pages. So I have individual ones for specific pages that I'm working on. All of these are specific pages, but it makes it a heck of a lot easier for me to find out what program it's for, what form it's for, without having to dive into one file and find out where it is. And because I know it's a page and I know it's a file, I know exactly where to go to it rather than having to pretty much look around for it. So yeah, until the Georgia Tech community gets better about working with Sass and working with some of the new technologies that's going on, it's going to be hard for me to get rid of this because I don't want to increase the barrier of difficulty to get in. I want to make it as simple as possible. But ideally, as more and more Georgia Tech developers start to get comfortable with it, I can extend this further to be more like SMACSS. So build out a base folder that has all that in there. Build out all the different areas, and then basically within my theme folder, be able to throw all these different pages, administrative, theming changes in there, so that all of that is being incorporated and is also flexible for the future of the product. So with that being said, I've come to my favorite part, the questions and answers. So does anyone have any questions for me? Nice. I know I've done a good job, or at least everyone's scared off. Yes, in the back. So Compass ended a life, and what's funny is that they actually announced it on a tweet, and that's a tweet of the maintainer of it. That's the only place you can find it. If we go to Compass right now, just because I love showing this off, Compass Sass. Is there anywhere on this page that says that it's end of life, that it's not being maintained anymore? The answer would be no, which makes it a lot harder if you're coming into Sass. You see this and you're like, this is amazing. I want to use this. And then you find out it's Ruby only. It hasn't been updated for the last 2 major versions of Sass. And so you can't take advantage of things like source maps or anything like that. So you're pretty much out of luck. What I had to do is pretty much what the encourages now, both in Drupal using Sass as well as the general web community, is to move to libsass and leverage mixins, or sorry, plugins either through Grunt or Gulp. So those are just little processors that grab all the additional functionality. So in this case, the last couple of months or so, I've been sort of learning how to use Grunt because it is very new to me. And so I basically built out a Sass template that's pretty much grabbing all the things that I used to use in Compass and finding analogs and ways of porting over to some more common areas that don't involve Ruby, because I don't want to use Ruby. It's slow. It scares me. And it doesn't do error very well, and it takes up a boatload of memory, especially with a larger project. Unless I'm putting in a bunch of caching, it just like slows my machine to a crawl. And there's no reason why a CSS processor should be slowing this machine to a crawl when I compile. No reason whatsoever. So that's what I ended up doing. It's the learning curve for it, if you haven't touched it before, isn't exactly the easiest. It's very much how like when you first touch CSS in your young years, when you forgot how to use semicolons, when you forgot to, write the correct selectors, when you forgot how to use brackets correctly. It's going to be like that. A lot of pain points for remembering the syntax, the structure, and then what to copy from Google, honestly, for what people have already done. But with that, it took me about 3 hours learning it, basically, fire to the floor and getting it set up, and I was able to do it. And because of that, now it's a lot quicker. So that'd be my recommendation. libsass has changed a lot of my workflow for what I do, but it also allows me to be a lot more flexible because I don't have to basically wait for the Ruby community to catch up. What I can do is just take, a very open and very easy to code for community that works on a lot more machines and out of the box for a lot more people. Yeah, you're welcome. Any other questions? Yes.
What you do with Georgia Tech, is there a base thing you work on? What were you SMACSSing?
So all these sub themes basically leverage base theme, which is pretty much I get reward points for it. Don't knock it. It's I'll be honest, it's a horrible search engine, especially when you're doing like Drupal queries. If you type something on it, it's not going to give you Drupal. You're like Drupal, Sass, Grunt. It's going to be like, you don't need Drupal, you mean Sass and Grunt. So, but the good side of it is you get rewards points, which gives you Amazon gift cards. So if I'm getting free Amazon gift cards, I'll bite the bullet every now and then for Bing. It's 10 searches a day. I can hate myself for 10 searches a day. Yeah. I know. You're not the first one or the only one that does that. I probably get that every time I open up a new tab, so it's okay. So Georgia Tech's default theme basically gives you header, how it looks, all the stuff that allows you to build up a site pretty quickly. But beyond that, once outside of the header and footer area, you're kind of on your own. There's no styling there and everything looks pretty fugly. I mean, it's just not pretty. It's very bland. It's pretty much what you would see from, you know, basic default CSS. So
based off a contrib theme, or was it a custom one?
It's a custom one. And that was a decision of a specific unit on campus. We had discussed the pros and cons of working with a theme framework, or, you know, a foundational theme, as it were, working instead with a custom theme, and that's the direction they went in. So with Drupal 8, it may be different, but with Drupal 7, that was the direction given the product that they had that they need to turn into a Drupal theme, as well as the resources that were available.
But as long as someone's made a decision, you stick to it. It's all good, right?
Yeah, so you don't have half the campus working with one, half the campus working without one. And of course, because Georgia Tech tends to have some lag in terms of picking up new web trends, this helps because someone doesn't have to learn a framework if they've never heard of one. If they're still trying to figure out variables or working with, you know, media queries. It's a big step to make. So I don't want to alienate people that are doing their job by making it harder on them. Pauline, did you have a question for me? Yes.
I have one.
Yes,
Sass blogging.
Yes.
Love it, hate it.
Okay.
So how do you get around when you need something within your directory to be above another file in the priority? Because Sass blogging doesn't.
It doesn't care. It doesn't care about priority because all it does is it's alphabetical. So it goes into the folder and it says whatever's first in this folder. So it goes to my plus GT first, since that's the only way I can make it first. So it goes into there, grabs all the stuff. Then it goes into includes, grabs everything. Then it goes into global, finds all the good stuff there, and then goes into the partials and starts going wild in there. So the way that I do that is, rather than trying to build out any priority within specific folders, is that I build my folders expecting that Sass globbing is basically going to drill down through it like a script would. Go down, make it alphabetical, and then go through it. So I make sure that the hierarchy of it basically goes through and is alphabetical enough to where it basically can parse it all without having to worry about whether something's required beforehand, because all the things that are foundational to what I need come very first because I've ordered the folders to be that way.
Okay.
So it bastardizes a little bit of SMACSS because SMACSS doesn't really care about that. So I had to turn SMACSS on its side and say, I don't really care about the name of the folders as long as they do something similar to what I need. So in this case, SMACSS doesn't really have anything about what happens when you need some variables up front before anything else. It doesn't really have anything about that because it doesn't care about whether you're using a CSS preprocessor or if you're being super lazy like me and expecting to be very scalable on the number of partial files you'll have and the number of folders you'll be using. So in this case, if I were to go into partials, I built it out so that I can add 25 other folders within there. And as long as I make them so that they process in an alphabetical order, I can add as many as I want, and Sass globbing will import all of that just fine as long as it's alphabetical. And as long, go ahead.
So then what you're saying is so like in the theme folder, if you have a file, you have like 20 files in there, you'll just name them 1, 2, or something like that if you need them to be in a certain order?
Correct. And that's sort of the struggle that you have with Sass globbing. For that payoff of having it all automated, you then have to be a very, very awful person and name them in very non-intuitive ways or use different characters if you want them to be ordered that way. That's why I'm using the plus and folder names. I would never ordinarily do that, but because I have that need, I'm sort of forced to make plus GT as a folder name because it happens before anything else.
Oh, simple plus.
So it'll handle symbols before anything else. And like I said, a bastardization of how you would use it, but it works for my use case and for the use case of adopting on a bunch of users and web developers that don't have a lot of experience with this and need to get started with something very basic that still makes sense when they look at it.
Yeah.
Do you have a question?
How many people have used, or developers have you deployed this to? Is this school-wide? Is this?
So Georgia Tech is something very decentralized where web development is very siloed. And I think you'll see that at a lot of higher ed. Because of that, this is an open thing that is available to anyone that wants to use it. However, I am not in the position right now to be able to say, this will make your life a lot easier. I recommend you using this for any new project. So some people tend to adopt it, run into an issue, and then crawl back to the safety of regular CSS. I don't know if it's very safe because I remember working with CSS and I still have to for some projects. And it absolutely drives me insane when I have to go to the bottom of a custom.css file to add some new CSS.
Do you guys work in version control?
We use Git for version control. We use that to sort of place our commits and basically build out releases there. However, with a very small population, you know, I can build it out there and pass it on, but you have to remember, again, this drills down, version control repositories may not be something that someone that has trouble picking up new features may not be comfortable dealing with if they don't understand the benefit that comes from it. And I can educate that to them every day, but if they don't want to use it, exactly. All right, any last minute questions? I'm 2 minutes overdue, but if you have any additional questions, feel free to tweet at me. That's, let's see, eSimbrat, so Twitter, eSimbrat. Heaven forbid this should be correct. Yeah, come talk to me. If you have any questions in between any of the breaks and you want to chat more, come find me. I'll be over in the corner doing registration, all that good stuff. Otherwise, thank you so much.